Welcome back, boils and ghouls. Remember, if you enjoy these videos, please like, comment, share, and Hulk smash that subscribe button. But right now, have no fear, you're not lost, you're just off the beaten rack. In this series, we discuss books that you might not have heard of for one reason or another. Tonight is going to be a little bit of a different episode, as it's the first webcomic I think I've ever gotten invested in enough to do an actual video about. And man, is it a weird one. When I saw Akira for the first time as a kid, like a lot of people, I think my tiny little mind was kind of blown. When I found out it was based on a comic a year or so later, I had to read it. Now, mind you, Akira totally went over my head. The film adaptation and the manga. I was just too young to get it. Or maybe immature. I mean, I'm a 40-year-old man that refers to himself as a jerk. Anyway, as a kid, I was lost. But there was something that kept drawing me back in, time and time again, until I finally started to understand it. A little bit. So I read it again and again and again. Akira is one of the few touchstones in comics that you can come back to almost infinitely and find new interesting things about. The storytelling is incredible, the plot is brilliant, and the art, there's not many more culturally transcendent visuals than those of Akira, and that's for good reason. They're instantly recognizable no matter what mask they wear or how garbled the image is. In this sense, Akira is a masterpiece that is as much meant to be experienced as necessarily understood in some profound manner, which is one of the reasons I think the visuals are so timeless and culturally transcendent. Following its release and subsequent extreme popularity in the US, I was faced with an almost never-ending barrage of culturally appropriated, westernized adaptations, imitations, and images of Akira that flooded into my world. Over the decades, I've become almost completely desensitized to it. There's not a much better way to ensure I will not pay attention to what you are doing than to yank stuff from Akira, except for maybe ripping off The Simpsons. But for some reason, when I saw Bartkira, I just could not help but kind of stop and take it all in. On the surface, it should just be the most pointless and useless comic ever made. It is exactly what it sounds like, a mashup of the legendary Akira manga by Katsuhiro Otomo as retold using characters and settings borrowed from Matt Groening's The Simpsons. I know it sounds dumb on the surface, but I promise, this series is way better than it should be. Honestly, probably better than it has any right to be. The art is absolutely mind-bending at times, and the series takes on a completely different light when recast with the familiar faces of Neo Springfield. Bartkira succeeds on nearly every front where it should fail. What started as a way for artist Ryan Humphrey to pass the night evolved into a worldwide phenomenon, spawning thousands of images of art and illustrations by thousands of different artists from all over the world, but answering to only one name: Bartkira. Join me tonight as we take a quick look at some of the absolutely insane work that was created in the incredible 5 years that the Bartkira project was active. And since I'm not going to even try and tackle the plot to Akira in a single video like this, I'll walk you through the history of Bartkira and how it came to be and went down, and as always, I'll drop some trivia tidbits as we check out the art. So let's head over to the table and check Bartkira out. Now, Bartkira started off simply enough. UK-based artist Ryan Humphrey wanted to join an online Tumblr community dedicated to Simpsons fan art. It, however, developed into something completely different and infinitely more complex and intriguing. An adaptation of all 2,200 plus pages of Katsuhiro Otomo's original Akira manga, utilizing the art and participation of more than 700 artists. 768 artists creating 5 pages apiece over about a 5-year period to be exact. While wildly successful, Bartkira unfortunately falls into somewhat of a legal gray area concerning parody law, and because of this, there's only ever been a small selection of the art created for the project actually released in print. Lucky for me, my amazing brother-in-law happened across the first collection, knew I liked comics, and with his impeccable taste, sent it to me for my birthday. I'm really happy he did, because otherwise I probably would have never even been aware of this series, or if I had, given it a second thought, and I'm really, really happy that I did. As I mentioned, in 2013, Ryan Humphrey wanted to get involved with the Simpsons fan art Tumblr community, but it was a closed, tight-knit community, and he knew he'd have to come up with something really good to get in. He originally toyed with the idea of doing a comic about Ralph Wiggum befriending a corpse that he believed could talk, but quickly abandoned the idea, ironically, as Humphrey never fancied himself a cartoonist. But while in search for inspiration in his room, Humphrey saw his Akira trade paperback, instantly recalling the constant pop culture mashups from the Simpsons Halloween of Horror specials that he loved. Humphrey picked up a pencil and busted out a few pages of what would eventually become Bartkira. The first pages I think that he did were the Awakening sequence where Bart blows up Neo Springfield. I believe Humphrey initially did something like 9 panels or so that first night, but there was a problem. The thing was, once he'd actually drawn them, he couldn't figure out how to submit them to the Tumblr community that he was actually trying to get into. After messing with it for a while, he decided it was late, and Humphrey just posted them to his personal Tumblr account to be done with it for the night, and he went to sleep. Overnight, Bartkira exploded, and it kept growing. More and more people got interested, and soon, Humphreys wasn't just trending. There were other people doing Bartkira pieces. People were flipping out about it, and while Humphrey had enjoyed success before, Bartkira was blowing up. So, being an intelligent person, Humphrey decided to make some more of what he then dubbed Bartkira. Humphrey posted this material that he was creating to his Tumblr account for a few weeks, and it was really starting to take off when a guy named James Harvey reached out. James Harvey is another UK-based artist. He's the guy behind the series Masterplasty, and he did a stint on Doom Patrol for DC as well at one point. Extremely active in the online art community, Harvey had previously been really involved with LiveJournal when that was the big thing. On LiveJournal, James Harvey enjoyed interacting with people, offering up challenges and interactive projects for fellow artists. Soon, he wasn't just enjoying himself, though. Harvey kind of fell in love with it. The whole experience of connecting and interacting with other artists fascinated him, and it drove James Harvey to be a rather prolific LiveJournal creator. Previously having been a teacher, Harvey already enjoyed interacting with people, especially fellow artists, and when he found LiveJournal, it seems like Harvey really felt like he had found his calling in these interactive art projects. But when Tumblr came along and knocked LiveJournal off the map, Harvey was met with less and less interaction when offering up his challenges and any interactive possibilities. As interest waned on his prompts, Harvey yearned for a new project that could inspire people to take up their pens and pencils in collective effort once again. Something that could somehow pique their interest into involvement. When James Harvey saw Humphrey's Bartkira work, he knew there was something there. Harvey said basically exactly what I thought when I saw it for the first time. Quote, "I'm not really sure why it works, but it works." He enjoyed the work, but beyond being impressed with the work, Harvey saw Bartkira's potential. He saw an opportunity for himself and for a new project, larger in scale than anything he'd attempted before. In Bartkira, James Harvey saw the key to uniting and mobilizing hundreds of artists of all walks of life from all around the globe. Akira and The Simpsons are two of the very few animated franchises which seem to almost transcend cultural and geographic location. This is to say, people love them basically wherever you go, even the most strange and confusing of places. People are already beginning to do their own Bartkira pieces on their own volition, and Harvey knew that if he could just spearhead a movement, he could recruit and guide the artists to fulfill a growing vision that had begun to seed in his mind. He'd finally found a way to recapture the interactive projects he believed to have died with the disillusionment of the LiveJournal community. But he needed permission, or at least he wanted it. While Ryan Humphrey obviously didn't really have a legal claim to the idea, it wouldn't look very good for some random dude to just swoop in and hijack the entire Bartkira idea. At some point or another, it would come back to haunt any project that Harvey could hope to assemble. So James Harvey quickly reached out to Ryan Humphrey to see what his plans with the idea were, and explained that he thought that Bartkira had the very real potential to unite all these different people under this unified banner and goal of recreating all 6 volumes of Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira. The exact details of this exchange have never been fully publicly shared that I'm aware of, but Humphrey didn't have any bigger plans for Bartkira, and I imagine the sales speech was pretty darn good because James Harvey was quickly able to get Humphrey's permission to, quote, do whatever he wanted. And that he did, ridiculously quickly as well. James Harvey immediately set up a business email for Bartkira the same day he received Humphrey's blessing, as well as laid out a spreadsheet for assigning the pages to their respective artists. Then he sent out the call for artists on his Tumblr page. He was instantly inundated with people wanting to get involved and set about assigning pages. Before long, there was a waiting list for a project that would involve hundreds of pages of material being created for free. That being said, if you've never read Akira, as I mentioned, there's like 2,200 pages of material. That's a lot of stuff. It's an insane amount of material to produce, but it's also an insane amount of material to keep track of. Bartkira is the kind of project that would test even the most battle-weary veterans of the publishing industry. With a reported 768 artists involved, James Harvey, however, seems like he was kind of undeterred by the maddening prospect of the magnitude or the scope of what he was setting out to do. His previous experience with organizing group art projects, as well as some of the contacts that he'd made throughout his live journal days, allowed him to not only simply handle the sheer amount of information he was having to take on, but just as importantly, it allowed Harvey to take Bartkira as seriously as it needed to be as a project. James Harvey's eye for detail is one of the things that sets Bartkira apart from most of the other stuff you could compare it to on face value. He hadn't just imagined what Akira would be like replacing the characters with those of The Simpsons. He'd actually begun to build a world with a binding aesthetic and, surprisingly, artistic boundaries in some cases. When he was assigning pages, Harvey asked the artists who were involved with the earlier stages of the story to refrain from some of their artistic license and remain more true to the appearances of the characters from The Simpsons, going so far as to actually reject several pages and designs because of it. James Harvey says he wanted the characters to at least resemble their Simpsons counterparts in the beginning, and then have them slowly change and kind of devolve into these more and more abstract amalgamations as the book progressed, so as to not completely disorient or distract the reader. When I was reading Bartkira, I honestly didn't even notice the fact that the art is, in a sense, devolving concerning what the two worlds would look like should they actually collide and combine in this bizarre fashion. The farther you get, the stranger it looks in a lot of cases, and looking back, Harvey was 100% right. The more you get invested in Bartkira, and not just the story of Akira or the Simpsons characters, the more you're able to accept this kind of amalgamated symbiotic universe where the two overlap and begin to blend together, just like the Halloween of Horror episodes that Bartkira creator Ryan Humphrey is so fond of. Unfortunately, even at this early stage in the story, the fact that the project had all these fantastic possibilities and all these people getting involved was of very little comfort to creator Ryan Humphrey, who has always had kind of mixed feelings concerning the Bartkira project by James Harvey. And rest assured, there was a vast difference. Harvey was turning it into an artistic movement involving people from all over the world. And as art began to pour in, Harvey even began to organize a series of international art shows to display the pages and other illustrations being created for Bartkira, flying all over the world to promote the project, attend art shows, and do interviews. Like it or not, James Harvey had completely become the face of Bartkira, not Ryan Humphrey. Though it does feel in retrospect that James Harvey had kind of just completely taken over by this point, he had been given permission to do as such, and Humphrey hadn't set out with a grand plan to recreate Akira. He was just making some drawings in his bedroom for fun to share with some other people that he hoped would be his friends online. While to some, it might not always appear so. I felt like James Harvey did always seem to try and respect Humphrey as Bartkira's originator and include him as best he could, or at least when convenient, in his expansive architecture of plans. It's just James Harvey had all these grand plans, and Ryan Humphrey was just a guy who would come up with a really cool idea and let someone else turn it into something truly amazing. This is a difficult and precarious relationship shared by many of the most revered comics professionals as well. James Harvey never turned to the dark side, so to speak, and decided to make sure that while he wasn't involved with any of the glitz and glam spectacles of Bartkira, Humphrey wouldn't feel completely left out or excluded any longer. James Harvey reached out to Ryan Humphrey and offered him whatever pages wherever he wanted in Volume 1 as a sign of respect and to remind people who had come up with the idea. I really applaud both men for their handling of this situation, as I think it had the real potential to get ugly had one of them chosen to go that route. Humphrey picked, I think, 10 pages spread out across the first volume, whatever scenes he wanted, but as time progressed and despite these small gestures by James Harvey, as the Bartkira project continued to grow in scope and intensity, Humphrey appears to have felt, in many ways, excluded. He wasn't anything special. He was just another cog in a giant machine. The entire thing was completely out of his hands at that point. And he had come up with the idea of Bartkira, but it was James Harvey who was making it a reality. After a short period of adjustment, I feel like Humphrey took it with a lot of grace and tried to make the best of the exposure and appreciation for his creation from people all over the world, and not get caught up in the notion that he was missing out on anything or being ignored. Humphrey was never openly aggressive or even passively negative about the Bartkira project, but you could tell it bothered him a bit not to be at all the art shows and all of the exhibits. Ryan Humphrey and James Harvey both seem like solid folk, and Humphrey is quick to compliment both Harvey and the final results of the Bartkira project today, but behind the scenes, Humphrey wasn't the only one who felt like they'd lost control of their creations in James Harvey's hands. When the art came in for Volume 1, James Harvey has said that he wanted it to read like a, quote, real comic book. While an admirable and necessary goal if you're setting out to retell the story of Akira, Harvey went entirely too far in a lot of people's eyes to accomplish this end goal. He digitally altered some of the art that had been submitted for Volume 1 of Bartkira in Photoshop without the artist's consent or knowledge. While Harvey regrets the decision now, he said at the time he simply did it because it was either 5 minutes of work for him on Photoshop right then and there, or the work of him getting a hold of the original artist, giving them a list of the corrections, and then waiting on them to both make the corrections and resubmit the work. While this is absolutely true, not to be a jerk, but as editor of Bartkira, that was kind of the job that he had signed up for, in my opinion. It was nothing egregious, but there was a fair bit of outcry from certain people who had their art altered without their permission. While James Harvey definitely learned his lesson, messing with people's art without their permission is shady territory. I mean, I know this is a fan-submitted kind of semi-legal, non-publication art project, but it seems like that's the exact kind of place you expect to not have your stuff messed with. Though, honestly, in Harvey's defense, the first volume, well, honestly, all 6 volumes, contain such radically differing art, it can be a bit jarring at times from page to page, style to style, and even from color to black and white at times. Learning about the effort that James Harvey put into making Bartkira read more cohesively and less jarring, and observing how jarring it still was even with these revisions and changes, it's not hard to understand why he made such a rookie mistake. It wasn't about altering people's art so much as it was about making a more cohesive image in service of the greater story and the bigger picture, and that is something I can respect. although I can't agree with the route he took. Without the guiding hand of James Harvey to hold all the tiny strands of Bartkira together, I believe the entire tapestry would have completely unwoven in nearly anyone else's hands, though. The process wasn't easy. Frankly put, it was a mammoth undertaking, and it was a learning experience even for the already seasoned James Harvey, taking double the length of time projected for release, ballooning from the initial touted 6 months to a full year. This created a problem that James Harvey had not foreseen. By the time the Bartkira Volume 1 was finally released almost a year after its undertaking, most of the artists involved had already shared their pages with their fans. Dedicated fans had even tracked down and read huge chunks of the first volume months before it was actually available, just by following the artists involved. Falling victim to the very same viral nature that had made it possible, Bartkira was already kind of old news by the time it was released in 2014. James Harvey was not going to repeat that mistake though, and he got out Volume 2 in less than 4 months, with Volume 3 following hot on its heels in July of 2015. Along with the July 2015 release of Volume 3, there was another landmark moment in Bartkira history. As part of the promotion for the release of Volume 3, the project released an absolutely jaw-dropping trailer for a fake Bartkira animated film. It is absolutely incredible. It is a 2.5-minute long reimagining of one of the original Akira trailers and was done by a team of more than 50 separate animators, all headed up by a woman named Caitlin Sullivan. Sullivan had prior experience working on collaborative animation projects in the past, creating an episode of Sailor Moon utilizing a team of more than 250 fan animators. Sullivan was already a contributor to Bartkira and an animation producer by trade. Given her previous endeavors with the fan-produced Sailor Moon cartoon, the trailer was somewhat of a logical extension of what was happening with the Bartkira project by that point, although it did appear to have caused a bit of confusion among fans, many of whom, only half paying attention to the project, began to ask when the film was coming out. Like, a lot. All the time, actually. So much so that they had to add it to the description of the YouTube post and disable comments for the video. While annoying to no end, this proved something very important. A lot of people were very interested in Bartkira. By this point, there was so much attention on the project that it was discovered Akira creator Katsuhiro Otomo himself and his son were not only aware of Bartkira, but were both fans. Upon learning of this, James Harvey's people immediately reached out to Otomo. There was communication of some sort, and not of legal action. So for a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed like James Harvey might actually be allowed to do something with the property aside from publish it for free online. Eventually, however, Kodansha, the publishers of Akira, sent a letter to James Harvey informing him that while they were aware of Bartkira's existence and were uninterested in legal action, they could unfortunately never allow it to be published sequentially, as this would provide a potentially cheaper avenue for people to consume Otomo's work without him receiving proper compensation. They did state, though, that they would allow a selection of the material to be published as long as it was done non-sequentially. All things considered, it was a fairly forward-thinking stance for Kodansha to take, sidestepping legal action but still restricting the commercial applications of the project in a directly monetarily profitable sense. Kodansha stated that they had no problem with some of the art being published, though, so in April of 2016, to coincide with the release of the 4th volume of Bartkira, Floating World Comics published the Bartkira Nuclear Edition hardcover. While I have never looked through the Nuclear Edition hardcover in person, I do own the original Bartkira trade paperback from 2014. I know the Nuclear Edition contains a different selection of art than the trade paperback version, and there is a lot of concept and character designs and other illustrations that saw publication in the Nuclear Edition that are definitely not in my 2014 trade paperback. While they are cool to look at, unfortunately these books are pricey. The trade alone will set you back $80 plus for a nice copy, and the Nuclear Edition is regularly listed for hundreds of dollars, although I am not entirely convinced that it actually sells for this price, as the original MSRP was only $20. So For me at least, that's never going to happen. While it sucks you can't just buy the volumes in print as books, you can just read them all for free on Bartkira.com. So, and speaking of money, it was at this point, following Kodansha allowing them to print the Nuclear Edition hardcover in 2016, that James Harvey decided what to do with any and all proceeds that they did make from the Bartkira project. Harvey announced that the proceeds from Bartkira would be donated to the favorite charities of Akira's creator, Katsuhiro Otomo, and Simpsons co-creator, Sam Simon. With this announcement, it was clear that there would never be any agreement reached about a physical publication of Bartkira, and that's okay with me. James Harvey announced that all proceeds from Bartkira would be donated to two places, the favorite charities of Akira's creator Katsuhiro Otomo and Simpsons co-creator Sam Simon. With this announcement, it was clear that there would never be any agreement reached about a physical publication of Bartkira, and that's okay with me. Getting 2,200 pages of material for free almost indebted me to the creators from the outset. I felt like I owed it to all these people to check out what all of this was about, and I think that was part of the genius of James Harvey's plan from the very start. After all, Harvey hadn't set out to become a millionaire when he started Bartkira. He just wanted to connect with other artists and create something fun and cool and interesting to read and look at, and he succeeded in all of those regards, in my opinion. Things continued to gain momentum as art shows continued across the world, and with volumes 5 and 6 touted for release on the website, people were eagerly anticipating what would happen next. It seemed like James Harvey and his crew might actually pull off this almost Herculean, seemingly impossible task. While many had considered the idea a joke initially, slowly but surely, they were getting interested and sucked into the gravity of the Bartkira project as it began to reach critical mass. Bartkira was all over the internet, but as the release of volumes 5 and 6 were pending, creator Ryan Humphrey was nearly completely out of the loop. His name was on the site. James Harvey wasn't going Stan Lee on him or anything, but Humphrey was certainly no longer the face associated with Bartkira in any sense, and Humphrey enjoyed little of the success or accolades of Bartkira. If you read about Bartkira at the time, there was only one name on everyone's lips, and that was James Harvey. And to be fair, Harvey had definitely undertaken the lion's share of the work, and I'm not begrudging him accolades or success, but it finally seemed by this point that James Harvey had fully eclipsed Ryan Humphrey in people's eyes concerning Bartkira in basically any sense. As if things between James Harvey and Ryan Humphrey weren't tense enough by this point, in June of 2017 there was a major announcement for what was to be the final Bartkira art exhibit in Tokyo, Japan. The venue announced that live at the event, James Harvey will be drawing the final page for the final volume of the series, thereby completing the Bartkira project he had undertaken with Ryan Humphrey's permission in 2013. While Harvey claims that this was news to him, he says he went along with it to make people happy and to get some good publicity. It was the last art show, it seemed fitting to draw the last page there. You can think what you want about the guy, but it really seems like James Harvey is pretty upfront and really doesn't try to feed anyone lines, a trait which I admire greatly in people. It was perhaps also because of his rather cavalier attitude and blunt nature that he also really surprised me in the end of this Bartkira story behind the story. While James Harvey claimed to have drawn the final page of Bartkira at the final Tokyo art show, that was not the whole truth. Instead, he actually had something entirely else in mind, something special. Instead of Harvey, on August 10th, 2017, Ryan Humphrey, the man responsible for creating the worldwide phenomenon of Bartkira, inspiring thousands of people to create thousands more pages of art, and gracious and humble enough to know that he had created something bigger than himself, and passed the idea on with his blessing to James Harvey, sent out a tweet. It simply read, "Tonight, I will draw the last ever page of Bartkira. Stay tuned." It was with this tweet that after more than 4 years, 6 volumes of material, including loads of ancillary and unused art, 768 artists, and more than 2,200 finished and sequential pages of art, that the story of Bartkira finally came to a close. While Bartkira obviously isn't the way that I would recommend you first experience the absolutely breathtaking and awe-inspiring work that is Akira, Bartkira is more than worth checking out and may, in some cases, make the subject matter a little bit more accessible. It easily transcends the cult-level cheese that the premise and even theme conjure to mind. It should also again be noted that James Harvey spent an inordinately long time casting Bartkira as well, figuring out how each character from The Simpsons would fit and work into the original characters' relationships and interactions from Akira on both levels. It's amazing how much time and effort they put into the smallest things, and while rough around the edges, it's in all the right ways for me. This attention to detail is very much reflected in the finished project as well. It's because of this kind of attention to detail that I feel Bartkira elevates itself from the pack of quick cash grabs utilizing famous characters from movies and television shows to sell pandering or second-rate and recycled material. While equally reliant on both Akira and The Simpsons, doing that coherently is in itself a rather miraculous feat. If you're interested in reading Bartkira, there's a link in the description below where you can check it out for free at the official site, as well as make donations to Otomo and Simonson's favorite charities. I'll also stick a link to the animated trailer down there. Give it a watch. Man, it is an amazing piece of independent animation. I'll also include a link to Battle Royale, Ryan Humphrey's solo comic effort following Bartkira, which adapts Battle Royale using Simpsons characters. I wasn't necessarily as impressed with it, but hey, if you want to go further down the rabbit's hole, your Uncle Jerk's always here to be your enabler. So, thanks for sticking with me. I really hope you enjoyed, maybe even learned something. I know this was a little bit different. If you liked this video, hit that like button and think about getting in the comment section below and letting me know. Share these videos with your friends, and if you really enjoyed what you saw, make sure you Hulk smash that subscribe button. If you do that, make sure you ding the little notification bell so you keep up with these videos that I'm always dropping. I'm hoping to do a shorter piece like this once a week, and then every other week have my bigger fact videos so you all don't have to wait so long for content. Thanks for all the support. It has been amazing to talk to all the new subscribers, and I cannot thank you all enough for taking the time to check out these videos. And an especially big thanks to all of you that take the time to leave such kind comments and make corrections when I make goofs. Constructive criticism and open dialogue are always encouraged on this channel. If you have any questions about tonight's episode, or you have a suggestion for a future episode, think about getting in the comments section below and sounding off. Not only do I love talking to you all, but I've learned some super interesting stuff, and I'm working on a few requested videos right now. So think about getting in the comments section. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed, maybe even learned something. And as always, I really, truly, and honestly ask only two things. Keep hitting those local shops and keep reading comics.